Hello, Cal Kellogg here. Lucy and I are out for our morning hike and thought I'd stop here and talk fishing destinations for a minute or two. Our destination this week is one of the best, Lake Almanor, up into Plumas National Forest. The lake sits right next to the town of Chester, California. Now, Almanor is a big lake. It's about 13 miles long. It has a big western basin, a big eastern basin, and it has a narrow area, which isn't too narrow, but that area is dominated by a big peninsula that kind of comes out of the northeast and extends towards the western shore. Now, the fishery is incredibly strong. The lake is full of aquatic insects, the largest of which are the Hexagenia mayflies, which hatch in June. And in terms of bait fish, there are clouds of pond smelt in the lake, depending on the season. They're not really there in the spring as heavily as they are in the fall. And in the fall, I've seen massive schools of pond smelt with individual smelt that go over 3 inches long. So those are good sized bait fish. They're almost the size of tray bait anchovies, which is interesting. Most lakes I don't see smelt that large. And all this food, it fuels, an incredible trout, salmon, and bass fishery. Rainbow trout, they're the most common catch at the lake. They average 2.5 to 3 pounds, and they can range up to 10 plus. There is a rainbow trout pen project at the lake that just adds to the fishery. It's very strong. There are a ton of rainbows in the lake. Brown trout have been known to get up to 15 pounds. Common fish are anywhere from 4 to 6, and 8 to 10 pounders, really large. King salmon, they used to have king salmon in the lake up to 22 pounds. They don't get that big anymore, at least people don't think they do. 6 pounder is a big fish right now. 3 pounders are common. Anything above, 3.5 to 4 is a really large fish. And, last but not least, the smallmouth bass fishery. It's one of the best smallmouth lakes in the state. Your average smallie is going to be 2 to 3 pounds, but fish up to 6 exist. I caught a 6 pounder there years ago. It's a really good bass fishery. Probably in terms of a quality fishing experience, the bass fishing probably surpasses the trout fishing simply because the trout, it is a size lake. I don't go there to get big numbers. The fish are hard to catch. There's a ton of food in the lake. And the lake doesn't have that many dominant features. Maximum depth is about 90 feet. The lake bed is actually an old meadow. The average depth is about 30 feet. There are a bunch of springs, and when you're dominated by kind of average shallow water, the trout tend to spread out, and they've got plenty to eat, so they aren't overly eager. What do I use to catch them? And I've caught a lot of trout there between 3 and 7 pounds. So I'm going there for trophies. Obviously, pond smelt imitations, spoons, small rapalas, stuff like that. Those can work really well. My largest fish there this year so far came on a small XL spoon in a shad or a smelt pattern, blue and silver. Trolling flies work very well there. My largest trout to come out of the lake so far was a 7-pound rainbow I caught last fall, and that fish hit an Arctic fox trolling fly. You could find video of that fish being caught here on the channel. When the fish are keying on insects, trolling small pieces of threaded worm right along the bottom can work very well. It doesn't really imitate the mayfly nymphs, which have to swim out of 25 or 30 feet of water all the way to the surface, and they're pretty large. They're about an inch long, maybe a little longer. It's not an exact imitation, but it's a close enough imitation that you'll catch plenty of fish on it. And that bite typically takes place in May and June. The rest of the year, you can do pretty well pulling smelt imitations, pulling faster stuff, a full variety of spoons. Medium-sized spoons, large spoons work well. Plugs work well in the cold water months. I really enjoy fishing the flies up there. I found them to be very reliable. And anytime you're on the lake, if you put a threaded worm behind some blades, you stand a pretty good chance of hooking up, as well as just a naked threaded worm. That's always worked well for me. Now, having said all that, the trolling, trolling is not the dominant method to catch fish. It's probably the dominant method, but it's not the only method. Moochers do very well there, mooching mealworms, mooching crickets, mooching crappie jigs, and jiggers do well too, working, your traditional, cripple herring type lures. Find the marks. If you find them concentrated, pound at them with the jigging gear. Bank anglers do well in the cold water months in the fall and in the spring. Inflated worms, power bait can work, stuff like that. Mostly you're going to catch rainbows. You're going to catch browns on the same gear, but if you really want to stack the odds in your favor, there's two things you can do for the browns. One, in the spring and fall, you can run your big minnow baits. That works great. And in the fall, you can soak cured roe in a natural color or drift it under a slip bobber. That can work really well when the browns are starting to stage up to spawn. When I'm trout fishing the lake, I really focus on that eastern basin. There's two boat ramps on the west shore. There's the Forest Service ramp about halfway down the lake, and then there's one up by the dam at Canyon Dam. They're both good ramps, and I tend to concentrate on that western shore. If I launch at that middle launch ramp, I'll go up the lake towards the dam and I'll fish Prattville. There's jetties out there. I might paddle across to my kayak and work the peninsula some, depending on the weather. It can get really windy at Almanor, so you have to be careful. Usually pretty safe in the morning, but in the afternoon it can blow. If I launch up towards the dam, I either work across the dam and kind of up the eastern shore, or I'll work down the west shore and usually turn around somewhere around Rocky Point. And I usually find fish in all those areas. There are a lot of smallmouth in that eastern basin, but the best smallmouth fishing definitely takes place in the western basin. There's some big stump flats up there. There's a lot of shallow water areas where those bass like to lurk. Your standard plastic, Cincos, stuff like that. Top waters can work in the summer. Minnow baits work well. Ripping minnow baits is a good way to go in the spring and early summer, as well as the early fall. And bait anglers catch a lot of smallmouth at Almanor using crickets and worms and stuff like that. So if you've never been to Almanor, it is one of the state's premier fisheries. It is hands down right now my favorite place to target trout. I'm not interested in catching big numbers. Big numbers are fun. That's great, but that is the place where I'm hunting a 10-pound rainbow, and I know if I put on my time, I'm going to get that fish there. They exist there, and they're big, they're beautiful, they fight hard. I don't really target the browns there, but I do catch browns incidental. My target species at the lake is definitely that big, iconic trophy rainbow, and it's really the only place in the state, at least the only lake in the state, that I know there are 10-pound wild rainbows in the mix. And best season to catch them, probably fall, but the spring is good too. In the fall, the fish are heavy. They've been feeding all summer, and they're going to be keying on those big schools of pond smelt. And when that happens, they are a sucker for large spoons, and of course my Arctic fox trolling flies. Anyway, that's kind of the size of Lake Almanor. You could do some more research yourself if you've never been there. Plan a trip. There's great facilities, 2 really good launch ramps, lots of camping, and all the services you want in the town of Chester, including supermarket, hotels, auto repair, gas, the whole deal. So anyway, Lake Almanor, that's our destination for this week, and it's a really good one. Well, I'll catch you next time. I'm Kel Kellogg, and I'm going to get back to hiking. Thanks, folks.